Welcome everyone. We're going to be underway very shortly. We'll just give another few seconds for people to join. Hello and welcome everyone. Good morning to those in the West and Central Australia, and good afternoon. We've just clocked over the afternoon here on the East Coast. So welcome everybody, and thanks very much for attending session 2 of our Excellence in Home and Community Care online symposium today. My name is Susan Greenbank and I'm the Senior Manager, Membership and Partnerships here at AXA, and I'll be facilitating the session. I'm very pleased to have you here with us, and I'd like to take the opportunity also to thank all of our presenters for today on our final day of the symposium, and also a particular thank you to our sponsors who we just would not be able to put on this type of event without, including our principal sponsor Hester and today's major sponsor Risk Tech. Just a little bit of quick housekeeping before we get into the presentation. You'll see that you've got some buttons at the bottom of your screen. One says Q&A, and that's where we'd love you to pop in any questions that you have for our presenter Bruce today. We'll be able to do some questions at the end of his presentation. So questions into Q&A, and that'll make sure that we see those. If you have any comments or feedback, please pop those into the chat section, the chat button there. And also, if you're experiencing any issues throughout this session, please send a message to us through the chat, and our team in the background will assist you with those things as soon as possible. So questions into the Q&A and comments and chat into the chat function. Thanks very much. With no further ado, I'll introduce you to our presenter for this session, Bruce Bailey. Bruce is the Managing Director of Pride Living, which is a valued industry partner of AXA's, As the founding director of Pride Living, Bruce's focus and commitment is in working with aged care providers to find practical and commercial solutions that assist them remaining sustainable, focused and financially viable in our complex environment. His expertise and passion are recognised nationally by providers, industry peaks such as AXA, and government. His work with the Aged Care Financing Authority as client director and as lead editor on both RSM and Pride Living's 2016 and 2017 Aged Care Sustainability Reviews are highly regarded throughout our sector. He's a member of Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, is a Chartered Tax Advisor through the Taxation Institute of Australia, a member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and a registered company auditor. So I can't think of anyone more qualified to speak with us this afternoon. I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Susan, and thank you all for making the time available. I trust that you enjoy the presentation, but more importantly, I trust that it actually sort of creates some questions for you that enables you to look at the ways that you can increase the viability of your operations, and through that, the longer term sustainability. They're two words that we use a lot. To me, viability is the short term, how do I make sure that the cash flow coming in is more than the cash flow going out? And sustainability is how do you make sure that that works in the longer term, complete with the whole reputational piece that you can continue to attract new customers and continue to grow your organisation. So today I want to share with you really a bit of data, and we'll put up a screen share in a second. And I just want to talk through some broader, bigger issues and bring that down to what I think and what I see is people taking a pathway that's not necessarily the pathway that the customer is suggesting they want you to take. So I've based this presentation on real data because I'm often quoted as saying everyone has an opinion and they're always right because they're your opinions. The challenge is whether that opinion is evidence-based or it's simply just your opinion. So we'll be looking at some evidence today, and hopefully what we make is therefore supportable, and you can question it and see how it applies to you. So let me start. The first thing is to understand that the way we start is not necessarily the way we end. Now, I'm sure everyone recognises that swish on the screen. It's the Nike swish. Now, Nike today is known for activewear, which applies to a generation to which I don't belong. It's known for elite sporting wear, and it's known for casual sporting wear. But it wasn't always the case. When Nike started out in business, it was an athletics coach and one of his athletes, and they were selling shoes from the back of a van. And then the coach actually designed a running shoe for this particular athlete. It was used, and then they started to get that manufactured. And then their big moment came with the Air Jordan shoe. And apparently today, that still generates over $100 million in royalties for Michael Jordan. And now they've gone on with lots of other clothing across lots of other things. I bring this story to this presentation because I think it demonstrates that you can either be constrained by your past or you can be driven by the opportunity of the future. And that's where I see the whole of the aged care sector at the moment. We're hearing lots in the Royal Commission, lots in the press, and lots in our own experience that's telling us that what people want for the future is not consistent with what's been provided in the past. So that's the frame for this presentation is, am I looking at the future or am I constrained by what I'm doing now and the past? So let's start firstly looking at the future. What does the future look like in terms of the supply and the demand? This graph that you can see now, the front orange graph is our forecast of government supply based on the government supply ratio and the population growth of Australia. Now, this was all done before COVID. We've had a reduction in migration, and sadly, we've had a reduction in the number of older people. Now, it will change, but it'll change at the margin. The dark blue line, which is really important to understand, is the updated government estimates. Now, government continually changes their forecasts and estimates. If you look back in 2020, the estimate or the supply that's there now has really gone ahead of the long-term forecast. But if you look out to 2027, it comes back. So if you go back to when government announced 10,000 extra home care places 12 months ago, that boosted the short-term supply. But in the government's own papers surrounding that statement, it showed that all they were doing was bringing forward the future increase in supply. And of course, that relates to the changing balance that the government is bringing in between residential care and home care. For those, most people will remember that the government changed the relative mix of beds back in about 2015, and that was to grow progressively over time the relative number of home care places. So government's now saying, we've seen the demand, we've accelerated that growth, but we're still capping supply. The yellow line is the Pride Living forecast of demand. All of these numbers are actually coming from the quarterly report on home care that's produced by government. So what we've done there is we've tracked the underserved and the not being given access to packages elements of that data set, and we can see from that, if we go through that, we can see that the demand far outweighs the government supply. I think this is always something to keep in mind. People talk of the government supply ratio as a demand representation, but it's not. It's a rationing process that government uses to manage the cost of the program. The underlying demand is worked out from the number of people who are not getting access to a place Whether they're getting access to a CHSP place or not is a secondary issue, but even if they are, they're still getting access to something less than their assessed need. So what we can see in here is if you go out to 2027, and it will continue past that, that the demand is going to greatly exceed the supply, either on the supply ratio target that the government's got in place, or the change in that because of short-term policy changes that are going along as we go along. Very significant opportunity for people who are not being served. So if we look to that, this is just a bit of a representation with numbers on that. So the orange line shows the number of people who didn't get a package. And as I say, this is the data from the government. And this is the number of people who were on a lower package. So what you can see in here is the number of people not on a package is declining over the period, but the number of people on a lower package is growing. There's two effects in this dark orange piece. The first is because the government bought in a significant number of new places in the last 18 months. It then tails down because of the general proportionate increase in places that's part of the system. But at the end of the day, we're still saying that come 2027, you're going to have 90 to 100,000 people who either are getting less services than they need or getting no services under the home care system. For the government to change this radically is a very significant cost to them. And as in all government systems that are large, there's always a rationing. So we don't see this disappearing anytime soon. And what does that all mean? Well, what it's telling us is that 44% of older people are not getting the package they've been assessed for. So as many clients or customers as you have now, there are that many again who are really not getting what they need. Well, that's only not getting the package. So whether the package is actually giving them what they need or not, another question. And I think this is a big thing that the industry is wise to consider. When we work with providers, the dominant thing we hear is about managing the package for the customer. So we talk about setting a budget. Everything is geared around managing the package for the customer. But what this is telling us is a huge number of people don't have a good enough package. And then there's a whole lot of potential customers that don't even have a package. So are we as an industry managing the government revenue, or are we managing what it is that the customer is saying they want? I think that's a critical question, and we'll see more about that as we go through a bit more of this data. But in general terms, there's a lot of things that you can talk about, and we'll go into now what people are saying determines how they relate to a provider. But the first thing is to understand what it is that the customer is really looking for. We've done some research into this, and I think, and I also had the experience of my own mother. Mum's well into her 80s, committed to staying at home, has lots of challenges in doing that, but her commitment to stay at home is so strong that it just is, there is no conversation about anything else. And so in doing this, it's a matter of, is her provider actively working on those the answers to the question is, how do I make it that I can stay at home? And I've got to say that in my mother's case, the provider is not really addressing that issue. They're waiting for mum to say, I need something more, and she doesn't really know what's available because she hasn't gone through this journey before, or they're focused around the package that she has. So they're not particularly focusing on a conversation with her, how do we maximise what you want? Which leads to the question of, what is it my mother actually wants? Now, she will say, I don't want to go into a residential aged care facility, and that's fine, but that's not telling you what she wants. I can say that I used to say this years ago, I would never in my bio say, I'm not a pilot. because it doesn't tell you anything. What you need to know is who I am. So in this case, I'm saying mum is actually looking for a quality of life rather than an avoidance of home care, of residential care. And she wants the quality of life she believes she can only get at home. So there's two answers. Can she get the quality of life she wants in a different setting? And is she getting it in the current setting? If we move along, we now look at what we understand is the reasons that customers choose a service provider. Now, this is generic. This is not restricted to aged care. But at the end of the day, customers are motivated. Research tells us that they have a need that they want to solve. That's fairly obvious. And you would say the acute event that causes someone to go into a residential setting is perhaps a need. So, you know, mum's had a fall, she's broken a hip, she can't be at home, she has a need, which is why we talk of residential care as being a grudge purchase. You then have customers' perceptions. They want something because they believe it is going to give them something good. I would say, in part, that's my mother's choice to stay at home. She perceives she gets a better quality of life by staying at home. But interestingly, with COVID, she's becoming a bit more isolated, and we're seeing, you know, the signs that come with most people in a home care setting is that isolation becomes an issue. And then, of course, there's price. And we can talk about price a lot, but all the research says it is not the top priority when anyone is buying a service, or rarely is it the priority. Quality is, you know, people buy quality. That's certainly true, and you can't have low price and high quality. And if you try and sell both, then you confuse your customers. People buy convenience, and I would say convenience is certainly a possible motivator with home care. I want to buy from someone who's in my area. I don't want to buy from someone who doesn't seem to have a presence. That goes without saying. And then there is service. So people want quality service. Quite interestingly, I think we've all probably had the experience in COVID. We're buying things online. I've just bought some new bike riding shoes online. I think they're coming from England. The service in that is they allow me to log in and track where my package is up to. And so it gives me an experience of service. It gives me the convenience of being at home. I get quality, and, you know, all those things fall together. So let's try and see how that flows now, those general perceptions flow into the home care context. And for this, we've looked at research paper number 6, which was done for the Royal Commission, because it gave some fantastic insights into what is driving consumer behaviour. If you haven't read this paper, I encourage you to have a read. You can get onto the Royal Commission website and you'll find it. The research involved about 10,000 respondents, so it is robust. It gives us a clear indication of what's going on. And it asked some really good questions, and therefore it got some really good answers, because you can't get a good answer unless you have a good question. So one of the questions they asked was, what is important to you to give someone a satisfactory rating as a home care provider? And what came out is respect and dignity. Now, we hear so much about this in the sector at the moment, and yes, it's important, but it's only important in getting a satisfactory rating for a service provider. It's far more important than these others for the purposes of a satisfactory rating. But do you want to be part of the pack, or do you want to be a leader? If you want to be a leader, then it's very different. For the leaders, as in the high quality or very high quality service, you can see now that respect and dignity has gone away. In fact, it's a given. If you don't give me that, then I won't deal with you. But what are important now are these 3 factors, which are the skills and training of the staff, it's the health and well-being of the care recipient, which is satisfying their real needs rather than managing their package. And over here, it's a consumer voice. I can lodge my complaints and they'll be dealt with. So you can see, if you want to have a high quality business, then you have to be good on these domains. If you want to have people that are satisfied, then you need to focus only on respect and dignity. Very significant drivers. So if you're over here, then price becomes more important. If you're over here, then quality becomes more important. So if we go then, let's have a look at what people think this is all worth. What was interesting here, so the survey or the research they did is they asked people how much you would be prepared to pay as a consumer for a satisfactory provider and how much you'd be prepared to pay for a high quality provider. And they had, the respondents were not all current recipients of a home care package. They were across ages. And what happened was the average for a satisfactory provider, a person was prepared to pay $132 a week. For high quality, I'm prepared to pay more. And we all know that from our own experience in things that we buy. We will pay more for higher quality. You'll pay less for McDonald's than you will for a bespoke burger. So many different examples of that. You pay a different price for a basic seat on an airline, or at least we used to before we stopped flying, than what you'll pay for a full service airline. And in the 60 age group, they will pay even more. These are the people that have had experience of home care. And that's either my experience with my mother being in home care or my mother who is currently in home care. And if you compare this to the current basic daily fee that you pay on a package, you can see that a person is prepared to pay far more. In fact, it's 3 times more that you could pay for someone on a level 4 for a high quality service. So what this is telling me is that most people are actually really focused on the outcome rather than on who's paying for it. So if your business is focused on managing a package, are you really satisfying the requirements of your clients? 2 other bits of research which you may have heard me quote before. There was a study done by Sydney University. They talked to a whole bunch of women who were in their 70s and 80s about their attitude to being admitted into a residential aged care facility. And what came out of that was that nearly all women would trade off almost all of their life to avoid being admitted to a nursing home. And then it came down to 80% actually said they would rather be dead. So the motivation for people in a home care context is not spending their package, it's avoiding this, it's getting quality, and these people are more than willing to pay. Now, some of you will say, well, that's not my experience. My question would be, is it your experience that you've been providing the high quality or you've been providing the satisfactory quality? This is just a small case study for a client of ours, which I believe demonstrates what we're saying or what I'm saying here today. In this case, the client had a combined care management fee and package management fee that was set at these levels, the dollars on the screen, across levels 1 to 4. We did a big piece of research around who their competitors were, and this is a mid-size operator. This is not a small operator, but it's a mid-size operator. And we found that they were towards the lower end in their charges. And so we said, well, you're probably not of the highest quality. So to go in and try and put yourself at the high end of these fees would be at risk. So we recommended that they go in and put themselves in the mid-range of these fees, which is what they did. And you can see where they changed them to. And as a result of that, we've got the data that says 93% of customers accepted the increase. If that's the outcome, then I would say the only conclusion is that people are not price sensitive. You make people price sensitive if you talk about price, but you make people price insensitive if you talk about outcomes. So just going on from there to what does it all mean? So these are some tips that I've come up with from our experience in working with providers, helping them redesign their business model for home care, and we've done that for a number of providers, and the research we're doing on the broader issues within the sector. The first thing is to focus on what people value, which is skills, health and well-being. Focus on dignity and respect is just focusing on what they expect. So if you go to a doctor, you expect competency. If I'm dealing with someone, I just expect them to treat me nicely and reasonably. I would say don't be limited by the government to government, customers and funding, because we know that that's restricted. The government will restrict the numbers and they will restrict the funding, and that means they'll always try and spread the funding more, so people will be underserviced. Structure your services to cover the 9 themes that provide quality of life. I haven't had time to go through these, but there's research that tell you what it is that you need to look at. Remember that it isn't price sensitive. Focus on outcomes for your customers, not the value of the package. So package is a funding mechanism, just like package availability is a management of supply. Have a clear customer proposition. Develop a customer attraction model. This is the greatest challenge, I believe, to all home care operators, and the one that's causing them not to get onto the different types of models. And finally, eliminate departure fees, because no one changes anyway, and it's just a silly thing to put in there. People will question your integrity with that. So with that, we've come to the end of our time. We've left a bit